Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned. Finally, we're finally back, Roger. February has not been kind. Let's just put it that way. But we're finally back, Roger, and hopefully we'll be back for the next few days. To talk about mammoths. We're talking about mammoths today, Roger. Not the big furry elephant-looking things that are dead, but big old books. Big old books like this one. Look, it's the Count of Monte Cristo. And it's big. This is a big old book. So we're talking about mammoth books today because it is almost that time on BookTube where the mammoths will march and everybody starts reading big old books in March. So let's talk about mammoths. I haven't read a mammoth for a while. It's been a few months at least. The last mammoth I read is this one. This is Stephen King's It, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second. But I love big old books if they're done well. I love giant books. And I haven't been able to read very many recently, and I probably won't read another one probably until, 2028, because I'm on the 500 book challenge. And if you don't know what that is, it's a challenge that I'm on where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. And I've got, 159 books left, I think. I think that's how many I've got left. And so, yeah, it'll be until probably 2028 before I read another mammoth, but I'm actually looking forward to it, and I wish I could join in on all the mammoth fun here on BookTube. But I've got to get through this challenge, so I'm concentrating on shorter books and will for a while. But I have always loved gigantic books if they're done well. This particular one is one of my favorites. I've only read this once, but I've longed to go back to this, and I probably would have gone back to this if it hadn't been for the 500 book challenge, because this is a magnificent book by Alexandre Dumas and, his associates. He had some help. But this is a fantastic story, and it's an episodic story that tells one great big story, and it's fantastic. If you haven't read this book, it is an investment in time, but it's pretty great. And most people who have read this, I think, consider this time well spent. It's a fantastic book. I probably would have read more mammoths. It just happens to be that most of my favorite writers didn't write them. Most of my favorite writers are pulp writers, writers like H.P. Lovecraft. Robert E. Howard, of course, is my favorite writer of all time. Clark Ashton Smith, Edgar Rice Burroughs, writers like that who wrote in pulp magazines. And so by necessity and because of the types of stories that they were telling, you didn't get any mammoths from those guys. Although I could argue that the Complete Chronicles of Conan, this is, if you read the whole thing at once, it is a mammoth if you read the whole thing. And I could make an argument that this tells one story. I probably will make a video about that, how this does tell one story, and it could be considered, it's not a very good argument, frankly, but I could make that argument. And so, you could consider this a mammoth. A mammoth being, I think the rules, I don't know who came up with these rules, but I think the rules on mammoths is that they have to be about 800 pages long. And, of course, the appeal of a mammoth, if it's done well, if it's a giant book and it's done well, books like The Lord of the Rings, right over there. Sorry, Roger, I bumped Roger. The appeal of books like that is that if they're done well, if they're well written, if they're engaging, you can slip into a world and exist in this world and just get enveloped in this literary world for quite some time. and it can be quite an experience. You can get lost in this big, huge world, this big, huge book that tells the story of one world, and if it's done well, it's fantastic. And I think that's why there are so many gigantic fantasy books out there right now, because there is that appeal of getting lost in another world. And if it's a big book, and a lot of fantasy books are big books, probably too big, frankly. If you have some well done world building, you can get lost in a whole nother place with intricate rules and societies and cultures and stories and characters. And it could be fantastic. Probably my favorite Mammoth, or probably the best experience I had reading a Mammoth, was reading this book, Les Mis by Victor Hugo. It wasn't this exact translation, actually, but I forget actually who the translator was, but it was a mass market paperback that I carried around with me for months. It literally took me months to read this book, but it was amazing. It was fantastic. I loved it. I really wanted to go back to it, but again, it's going to be a while before I do. When I do, I'm going to be reading a different translation, and it might be this one, because this one I have not read yet. Who does this translation? This is by Julie Rose, and this is the one that was published by Modern Library. Although there's one from Penguin that I hear is pretty great too. So I don't know which one I'll actually get back to, and which translation I'll read next time. Although this one is lovely, big old massive hardcover. But this had all of those things that I want in a Mammoth. It tells a brilliant story. It has magnificent characters. It's very well written, and you can get lost in this world, in the story that was told. This famously also has gigantic digressions that Hugo goes on that have nothing to do with the rest of the story, but I enjoyed those because I was already, I'm invested in the whole book. And so I didn't mind that so much, although that kind of thing does bother some people, understandably, I suppose. And I do long to get back to this book because I want to give this another look. And that's usually worth it. I've read War and Peace. I think I've read it at least twice. Yeah, I've read it at least twice. And it was a great experience both times. Again, War and Peace, which I have way over there. I'll grab it. Why not? We're talking about mammoths. This is my fancy pants version of War and Peace by Tolstoy. There he is there. This was, again, another experience like Les Mis that was just magnificent. This is a fantastic book, War and Peace. If you've never read this, it's great. A lot of people are daunted by its massive size, but a lot of those same people are reading like Brandon Sanderson and all that, or Tolkien, and so it's no more difficult than those guys probably. So mammoths can be fantastic. They can also be kind of challenging or difficult. The last Mammoth I read was this one, It by Stephen King. So we're going to get back to this because this is what I would consider. I might be in the minority on this. This is just my opinion. I consider this an unsuccessful Mammoth because there's a lot of great stuff in this, but then there's some stuff that's just not so great. And it's all mixed up into one gigantic book that just kind of goes on and on. And my feeling on Mammoths is that if it feels like the book is starting to get a little too long, it's too long. And this book definitely feels too long. This book feels like you can take, well over 100 pages, maybe 200 pages out of it, and it would be the better for it. This is just, this is just too much. And I've heard it said that some of the difficulties with this book is the fact that it's a horror novel and that it's difficult to sustain horror for hundreds of pages. I don't really agree with that. I think you can manage it. I think it's been managed quite well before. One of my favorite big books, this almost qualifies as a mammoth, is Michael McDowell's Blackwater, which, even though it was originally published in a series of slim paperbacks, really, this is all one novel. And if you read it, it's clearly all one book that tells one story. And it's magnificent. It's fantastic. And it manages to be a sprawling family saga as well as a horror novel. And for me, it never really felt too long. It was engaging the whole way through. And the story was fantastic. And, you know, I showed this recently. This edition is just magnificent. I think this is much more successful as a mammoth than it is. And Stephen King, he likes to write big, sprawling books. And I often think that those books would benefit from being a little shorter. Definitely in the case of this one. Unlike The Stand was not my favorite book, for sure. But I feel like The Stand earned its length. You know, that book really had to be long to tell the story that it was telling, whereas this one, not so much. And mammoths can be absolutely fantastic. And, you know, if you've got the time, you know, and if you don't have a stupid challenge where you have to read a lot of books in a certain amount of time, or you just want to get through a lot of books so you're not reading them forever, like I am on the 500 book challenge, then yeah, pick up a mammoth. Because like when I was reading Les Mis, for example, it didn't matter how long it took to read that book. You know, it didn't matter. I could take months with it, and I could take my time with it. And, you know, I just enjoyed the experience. And I look forward to getting back to that. I look forward to having that kind of experience again with a giant book. So we'll see when that finally happens, Roger. Like I said, it'll be a couple of years. Anyway, I was just thinking about big books. And so there's me talking about big books. I will catch you tomorrow. I think tomorrow I should do a comic book video since I've been missing some Epic Comic Book Wednesdays. So I will do that. I will catch you next time.